Did you make that promise?
At a university hearing, Dr. Naomi Bell admitted she had promised to marry
Yes.
custodian Malcolm Reed if he solved her equation. He did.
The promise was not his complaint. The missing credit was.
But his name vanished from the official presentation.
The model worked only after his line entered the equation.
He provided useful operational assistance.
Malcolm's building knowledge exposed a missing airflow route that fixed Naomi's model and revealed a serious ventilation hazard.
This line existed in the building before it appeared in the model.
Yet the university dismissed his work as routine assistance and reassigned him. Now, maintenance records and
Your
timestamps
east
threaten
return
to
is wrong.
expose who erased his contribution and why.
The model works.
The building still doesn't.
To understand how one missing line changed everything,
Tell us exactly what he solved.
the story returns to an empty laboratory 6 weeks earlier. By the time Dr. Naomi Bell took her seat before the university review committee, most people in the room believed they knew why she was there. They had heard about the equation, the custodian, and the sentence Naomi wished she could pull back into her mouth. The committee chair adjusted a thin stack of papers. Dr. Bell, did you tell Malcolm Reed that if he solved your equation, you would marry him? Naomi kept both hands beside a glass of water she had not touched. Yes, she said. I did. A chair shifted near the wall. The ventilation system gave a low mechanical hum. No one laughed. Stripped of the exhausted mid-tone in which she had said it, the remark sounded exactly as careless as it had been. Did Mr. Reed understand that as a serious proposal? No. Did he attempt to hold you to it? No. Has he requested any personal remedy related to the statement? Naomi's fingers tightened once, then relaxed. No. Malcolm has never asked me to marry him. He has never suggested I owed him a date or anything else. Malcolm sat in the second row, wearing the same Navy work shirt he wore on overnight shifts at the engineering annex. His employee badge was turned inward. He had not come to collect a promise. He had come to correct a record. 6 weeks earlier, Malcolm had entered Annex 4 with a cleaning cart, a ring of service keys, and 18 years of experience listening to buildings. By dawn, a stalled research model was working. A planned safety installation had been called into question, and a line from his maintenance map had appeared inside a major grant presentation. The line was there. His name was not. That was the reason for the hearing. The marriage remark mattered, but not because it created a debt. It mattered because it exposed the assumption beneath everything that followed. Naomi had believed Malcolm could not understand the work on her board. Her joke had turned his intelligence into an impossible condition. When he met it, the university found a more polished way to dismiss him. The committee chair opened a second folder. For the record, Mr. Reed's complaint does not request disciplinary action against Dr. Bell for the remark itself. Naomi finally looked at him. Malcolm did not return the glance. He was studying the air vent above the committee door. People who knew him understood that he watched machinery when human behavior became difficult to measure. The chair read from his filing, I am not asking the university to enforce a joke or manufacture punishment. I am asking it to identify who changed the model, who warned that the installation could fail, and who authorized the removal of that contributor's name. At the far end of the table, Dr. Peter Calder lowered his eyes to his notes. He was the chair of engineering's research and the administrator responsible for the grant. The university owns work produced through university operations, Peter said. Mr. Reed supplied facilities information while performing his assigned duties. No one disputes that he was helpful. For the first time, Malcolm moved. He turned his badge outward. Helpful. The word had followed him through boiler rooms, renovation meetings, and emergency calls. It meant they wanted the answer without admitting he had understood the question. The committee chair raised one hand. We will hear Mr. Reed's testimony in order. Dr. Calder, you will also have an opportunity to explain the document history. Peter leaned back. Of course. Naomi looked down at a photograph of her original whiteboard, pressure values, arrows, boundary conditions, and one bypass route drawn in a darker hand. She remembered Malcolm holding the marker without hesitation. More clearly, she remembered recognizing the truth before he finished the line. His correction was not merely helpful. It was the reason the equation worked. And when we later removed Malcolm's name from the revised presentation, Naomi had allowed the file to leave her office. That choice was not yet visible in the official record. It sat between two saved versions, hidden behind neutral labels and routine timestamps. But it was coming. The chair turned a page. Dr. Bell, before we discuss credit, retaliation, or the grant presentation, the committee needs to understand the technical contribution itself. She placed the whiteboard photograph in front of Naomi. Tell us exactly what Malcolm Reed solved. Naomi studied the photograph before answering. He corrected an assumption in the model, she said. An assumption I had believed was a fact. 6 weeks earlier, at 11:47 on a Thursday night, that assumption covered most of the whiteboard in Laboratory 4B. Naomi had spent 14 hours trying to stabilize an airflow model for the engineering annex. The university planned to demonstrate a new emergency ventilation system the following morning. Under normal power, the model worked. The moment she simulated a generator transfer, the pressure values began to oscillate. Air entered rooms it was supposed to leave and disappeared from corridors where the model said it should remain. Each failed run ended with the same warning: boundary conditions inconsistent. Naomi erased one section, rewrote it, and ran the calculation again. The warning returned. Behind her, Malcolm Reed guided a dust mop beneath a row of empty chairs. He had cleaned around the same coffee cup twice because Naomi kept moving it back into the area he had finished. "You planning to stay until that board apologizes?" he asked. Naomi looked over her shoulder. "Does the cleaning schedule require commentary?" "No commentary costs extra." She almost smiled, but the simulation failed again. Malcolm emptied a wastebasket and glanced at the diagram. He did not pretend to understand every symbol. The differential equations belonged to Naomi. The arrangement of ducts, dampers, fans, and pressure sensors did not. He had worked on that building years before the university placed a research laboratory inside it. He knew which ceiling panels concealed abandoned controls. He knew which dampers appeared on the computer system and which ones had to be checked by hand. Most of all, he knew the digital plans described the annex as it had been designed, not as generations of mechanics had kept it alive. He parked his cart beside the door. "Your east return is wrong." Naomi continued typing. "The return values came from facilities. The sensor values did. That line didn't." He pointed toward the board without touching it. Naomi turned. "That line is taken directly from the current mechanical plan." "Current according to what date?" She opened the plan file. "It was certified 4 years ago." Malcolm nodded toward the ceiling. "The building changed 9 years ago." He explained that a bypass damper had been added after an actuator failure caused the east laboratories to overheat. The repair had been considered temporary. Temporary repairs became permanent when budgets moved elsewhere. The damper connected the east return channel to the backup intake, but it had never been added to the central digital drawing. Naomi folded her arms. If that connection existed, one of these sensors would detect it. Not where the sensors are. The locations are marked on the plan. So is a wall that was removed before I started working here. Malcolm's tone remained calm, which irritated her more than an argument would have. She was exhausted, embarrassed by the failing model, and 8 hours away from presenting it to administrators who had already questioned whether her team could meet the grant deadline. She gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "Fine, solve it, and I'll marry you." The sentence landed badly before the last word left her mouth. Malcolm looked at her for a moment. He was not wounded in the way she expected, and he was not amused. His expression carried the tired recognition of a man who had heard intelligence treated as a costume that did not fit his uniform. "I'm not looking for a wife, Dr. Bell." He held out his hand. "I'm looking for the marker." Naomi hesitated, then passed it to him. Malcolm drew a narrow line between the east return and the backup intake. Beneath it, he marked the location of the actual pressure sensor. A building can't obey a plan that describes a building that no longer exists. From a pocket inside his work shirt, he removed a folded maintenance map. It was not an official blueprint. It contained dates, access panel numbers, actuator positions, and small notes written during inspections. Naomi recognized the patient structure immediately. This was not guesswork. It was a record. Malcolm showed her 3 entries from generator tests conducted over the previous year. During each transfer, the bypass actuator lost its control signal. Its spring mechanism returned the damper to the open position. Naomi entered the missing connection into the model. She moved the sensor point and changed the backup power boundary condition. The simulation ran. For the first time that night, the pressure value settled. Naomi leaned toward the screen. The equation had balanced, but the result was not a success. A set of airflow arrows near the east stairwell had reversed direction. She ran the model again. The same arrows turned red. "If the emergency fans here activate while that damper is open," she began. "They pull air toward the stairwell," Malcolm said. During a fire, the system designed to keep an evacuation route clear could direct smoke into it. Naomi stopped looking at his uniform. She looked at the inspection dates, the actuator notes, and the line he had added to her board. Her model had not failed because her mathematics was weak. It had failed because she had trusted a clean digital record over the physical history of the building. Her phone vibrated beside the keyboard. A message from Peter Calder appeared on the screen. Final presentation deck due by 7 a.m. No further revisions after submission. Naomi read it twice. Malcolm capped the marker and placed it carefully on the tray. "The equation works now," he said. Naomi looked at the reversed arrows. "Yes," she replied, "and the installation doesn't." Naomi did not send the presentation at 7. At 5:18 that morning, Peter Calder entered Laboratory 4B and listened as she explained the missing bypass, the generator transfer, and the reversed airflow. Malcolm stood beside the whiteboard with his maintenance map open over the official plan. Peter studied the red arrows. "Can you reproduce the result?" "We already did," Naomi said. 4 times. Then we correct the model and limit the demonstration to simulation. The installation can be reviewed separately. Malcolm tapped the outdated drawing. "Correcting the model doesn't correct that." Peter looked at his uniform. "Your position is overnight custodian." "He also worked in HVAC controls for 18 years, Naomi said. "He found the connection and identified the backup power failure." Peter's expression tightened. "Then Mr. Reed supplied field information. You interpreted it within the model." "I drew the connection," Malcolm said. "I told her which boundary condition changed, and that was valuable assistance." Assistance, a smaller word for the same work. Naomi added a slide to the presentation. She placed Malcolm's diagram beside the corrected result and typed his full name beneath it. Peter read the credit. "You cannot assign technical authorship before review. You just asked if the result was reproducible. That verifies the result, not the role." Malcolm looked at Naomi. He was no longer asking whether Peter respected him. He was asking what she would do now that Peter did not. "The diagram is his," she said. "The university owns as operational records created by employees." "That map was never in the university records," Malcolm replied. "If it had been, she wouldn't have needed me." Peter lowered his voice. The partner delegation would arrive in 3 hours. Admitting that certified plans were unreliable could suspend the grant. 6 research jobs, 2 graduate placements, and Naomi's project review were tied to it. He proposed temporary language. Facilities field verification had identified an undocumented bypass. Malcolm could be thanked in the room. Formal credit could follow after review. The plan sounded procedural. Peter was not asking Naomi to lie about the collusion. He was asking her to delay the truth about who had fixed it until the delay became convenient. At 6:42, Malcolm returned to his cleaning route. Before leaving, he photographed the whiteboard and noted the presentation file name. "Are you still going to show it?" he asked. "The simulation?" "Yes." "The live installation?" "No." "That wasn't my question." Naomi met his eyes. "I know." At 8:30, the delegation watched the corrected model stabilize. Naomi explained the bypass and recommended physical verification. Peter praised the research team for responding quickly to new facilities data. Then he described Malcolm as a helpful facilities employee. Naomi did not repeat the phrase. She also did not interrupt him. On the screen was Malcolm's bypass line, redrawn neatly. The actuator note came from his map. The sensor correction came from his hand. Beneath it, the slide read, "Field condition identified through facility support." His name appeared nowhere. That afternoon, the custodial office received a form authorizing Malcolm a $600 bonus for exceptional operational assistance. Peter had signed it. Malcolm carried it to Naomi's office. "Did you know about this?" "No." He placed it on her desk without signing. "You should be paid for the additional work," she said. "I agree. Then why refuse it?" "Because this pays me to let you call the work yours." She had no clean answer. During his dinner break, Malcolm wrote a technical memorandum. He cited work order numbers, inspection dates, sensor positions, actuator behavior, and the exact change made to Naomi's model. He attached time-stamped photographs and requested an immediate safety review and an accurate contributor record. He submitted it through the facilities system, copied research compliance, and kept the confirmation number. Before his next shift, he went to Annex 4 to confirm that the East Mechanical Room had been locked pending review. The door was open. Inside, 2 contractors were mounting control hardware beside the bypass actuator. One held a printed installation plan. Malcolm asked to see the rescission date. The drawing showed the old sensor positions. The bypass line was still missing. The university had corrected the presentation before it corrected the building. Malcolm stepped between the contractors and the open control cabinet. "Before you connect anything, I need you to stop." The older contractor lowered his drill. Facilities approved this work. Facilities approved it using the wrong drawing. Malcolm showed him the missing bypass route and the outdated sensor locations. The contractor studied both plans, then called his supervisor. No one argued with Malcolm, but no one agreed to stop either. They had a schedule, a signed work order, and equipment already unpacked on the floor. Malcolm knew that a conversation would disappear the moment the room emptied. He opened the facility's reporting system on his phone and issued a formal stop work warning. He recorded the drawing revision, photographed the actuator position, and attached generator test readings from his maintenance map. He wrote that the planned configuration could reverse airflow toward an evacuation stairwell during backup power. Submitting the warning placed his employee numbers beside every claim. He pressed send. Within 20 minutes, the contractors were ordered to pause. Within 40, Malcolm received a call from Facilities Director Elaine Porter. "You exceeded your authority," she said. "I used the safety procedure. You're assigned to custodial operations.
You don't supervise mechanical installation."
The procedure allows any employee who identifies an immediate hazard to report it. To report it, yes, not to direct contractors. They were about to install controls from a plan we know is wrong. Elaine exhaled slowly. "Who is we?" Malcolm looked through the open mechanical room door. 2 contractors were packing their tools, while a project manager spoke sharply into his phone. Dr. Bell reproduced the failure in her model. There was a pause. Do you have that conclusion in writing? Not from her. Then what you have is your interpretation. By the beginning of his next shift, Malcolm's access to the East mechanical rooms had been suspended. His schedule was changed from Annex 4 to 3 administrative buildings across campus. The notice called it a temporary operational reassignment. No one fired him. No one threatened him directly. They simply moved him away from the evidence and began asking whether a custodian with an expired technical certification was qualified to recognize a ventilation hazard. Malcolm documented that too. Naomi learned about the warning when Peter entered her office carrying a printed copy. Did you authorize this? No. Did you tell him the installation was unsafe? I told him the model showed reversed airflow during generator transfer. Peter placed the report on her desk. That distinction will not protect the project. Naomi reread Malcolm's final sentence. Physical verification must occur before installation resumes. It was measured, specific, and correct. What would protect the project? She asked. A controlled engineering review, not a facilities employee issuing conclusions outside his position. He prevented contractors from connecting equipment to a faulty plan. He stopped work based on an unpublished research model. Peter walked to her computer and pointed toward the presentation folder. Your corrected file belongs to the university. Malcolm's observations were made during university employment. This is institutional work. Then why is only my name on it? Peter's hand fell away from the screen. That question has already been addressed. No, it was postponed. After he left, Naomi opened the presentation history. The first revised version contained Malcolm's name beneath the bypass diagram. A second version replaced it with Facilities Field Verification. The final version reduced even that language to facilities support. The changes formed a record of her surrender. She opened her email archive and found Peter's message from the morning of the demonstration. Remove individual employee attribution until ownership and credentialing are reviewed. The institution cannot assign technical authorship based on an overnight interaction. Below it was Naomi's reply. Understood. I'll protect the institutional record. At the time, she had told herself she was protecting 6 research positions and years of work. Now the sentence looked different. The institutional record had been wrong about the building, wrong about the sensor locations, and wrong about the person who corrected them. Yet she had protected it from Malcolm. Naomi called Elaine Porter and asked why his access had been restricted. He disrupted authorized work, Elaine said. He identified a documented safety problem. He is not currently certified to make that determination. Neither was the drawing. Elaine did not answer. Naomi ended the call and opened a new message to the university review office. She attached the simulation results, her original whiteboard photograph, Malcolm's memorandum, the presentation version history, and every email Peter had sent about attribution. Then she added a statement of her own. Malcolm Reed identified the undocumented bypass, corrected the sensor position, and explained the boundary condition that stabilized my model. I allowed his name to be removed after being instructed to treat his contribution as institutional property. The corrected presentation would not exist without his technical work. Her finger remained above the send button. Once submitted, the files could not be contained inside the department. The grant partner would be notified. The demonstration could be postponed. Peter would say she had endangered her team to relieve her conscience. He would not be entirely wrong. An apology that cost Naomi nothing would ask Malcolm to carry the price of her mistake. She sent the message. Next, she informed the grant partner that the live demonstration should be postponed till the physical system was verified. She copied her research team so they would hear the decision from her, not through rumor. The reply arrived that afternoon. Naomi was removed from sole control of the project pending review. Grant spending was frozen, and the university scheduled a formal hearing. At 11 that night, she found Malcolm polishing the floor of the old administration building. His reassignment had placed him nearly half a mile from Annex 4. "I submitted the files," she said. Malcolm switched off the machine. "All of them?" "All of them. Including the version where my name disappeared?" "Yes." He studied her face, looking neither grateful nor relieved. "Why now?" Naomi could have told him she was trying to repair Dajij. Instead, she gave him the answer he had earned. "Because when Peter told me to remove your name, I did." For the first time, her private shame had an accurate place in the record, and soon she would have to say it aloud. "What Malcolm Reed solved," she said, "was the difference between the building in our records and the building that physically existed." Peter Calder adjusted his microphone. "With respect, Mr. Reed did not solve the mathematical model. He provided routine maintenance information. Dr. Bell incorporated that information using her academic expertise." The committee chair turned toward Malcolm. "Mr. Reed, how do you describe your contribution?" Malcolm placed his maintenance map on the table. "I found the condition making the model fail. You can decide what title that deserves." He did not begin with the whiteboard or Naomi's remark. He began 9 years earlier with Work Order 48 when 17. A failed actuator had caused the Eastern laboratories to overheat. The permanent replacement was delayed, so a bypass damper was installed as a temporary measure. Malcolm showed the invoice, the access panel number, and a handwritten note confirming that the damper would open automatically if its control signal failed. The university's digital plan had never been updated. He then presented 3 generator test records from the previous year. Each showed an unexplained pressure change during the transfer to backup power. Other employees had treated the readings as sensor noise. Malcolm's had inspected the actuator after every test and recorded the same physical position. Open. "The sensor couldn't explain what happened," he said, pointing to the official drawing, "because the sensor wasn't where this plan said it was. And the model couldn't account for the airflow because this connection was missing." He laid his map beside the photograph of Naomi's whiteboard. The bypass route appeared in both, drawn at the same angle between the east return and the backup intake. Peter leaned forward. "A maintenance sketch resembling a later research diagram does not establish authorship." "No," Malcolm said. "That's why I brought the timestamps." The committee's technical advisor displayed the document history on a monitor. Malcolm's photograph of the whiteboard had been recorded at 12:26 a.m. His maintenance memorandum included the same bypass route, sensor correction, and actuator behavior. At 12:41, Naomi had entered the new connection into the model. At 12:47, the simulation stabilized. The corrected equation did not appear in the grant files until after Malcolm's diagram and field notes had been incorporated. The sequence could not prove that Malcolm had written Naomi's equations. He had never claimed that he did. It proved something more precise. The equations worked only after he supplied missing system logic and identified the boundary condition that changed during backup power. The chair looked toward Peter. "Why was his name removed?" "I delayed attribution pending credential review." "You replaced his name with facility support." "The contribution was made during university employment." Dr. Bell's contribution was also made during university employment. Her name remained. Peter paused before answering. Dr. Bell was the project's recognized technical lead. Malcolm closed the folder in front of him. There it was again. Recognition used as evidence that only the already recognized deserved recognition. The chair turned to Naomi. "Did Mr. Reed ask to be listed as the sole author of the model?" "No." "Did he overstate his role?" "No." "Then why did you accept the removal of his name?" Naomi glanced back at the photograph of the whiteboard. "Because Peter gave me reasons that sounded responsible. The grant supported my staff. The deadline mattered. The university needed time to review the safety implications. She took a breath. But none of those reasons required erasing Malcolm. The chair asked about the marriage remark. Naomi did not describe it as humor or exhaustion. I said it because I believed his solving the problem was impossible. The joke exposed how quickly I treated credentials as proof of intelligence. I knew what it was like to have people question whether I belonged in a technical room. I still repeated that judgment when the person being dismissed had less institutional power than I did. Malcolm looked at her then, but his expression did not offer for forgiveness. Naomi continued. When his correction worked, I had an opportunity to challenge the assumption. Instead, I let the institution take the useful part of him and remove the rest. No one applauded. Naomi's admission did not restore the grant or erase what Malcolm's reassignment had cost him. It simply placed responsibility where she had once allowed it to disappear. After a recess, the committee returned with preliminary findings. The installation would remain paused until an independent physical inspection was completed. Malcolm would receive formal contributor credit for identifying the undocumented bypass, correcting the sensor location, and establishing the backup power condition used in the revised model. His memorandum would be added to the official project record. The university would audit every research project that relied on facilities data and create a procedure for crediting operational employees whose technical work materially shaped research conclusions. Malcolm's reassignment and restricted access would be reviewed as possible retaliation. Peter was removed from control of the project while the university examined his decisions. He accepted the finding without protest, though he continued to insist that he had acted to protect the grant. Malcolm did not celebrate his removal. Removing one administrator would not correct the drawings, rebuild trust, or prevent the same habits from surviving under softer language. The chair signed the findings and passed the document across the table. Malcolm read the contributor section twice. His name appeared beside the line he had drawn. When the hearing ended, Naomi met him in the corridor. "I'm glad the record is correct," she said. "It's closer," Malcolm replied. She understood the distance in that answer. Official credit could acknowledge his work. It could not require him to trust her again. Malcolm walked toward the elevator carrying his maintenance map under one arm. Naomi remained outside the hearing room with the corrected report in her hands. For the first time, the university's plan showed the building as it truly was. For the first time, it also showed who had seen it clearly. 4 months after the hearing, Malcolm sat inside a technical training center with a pressure control diagram, a calculator, and 3 hours to complete the certification exam he had postponed for years. His knowledge had never expired, the document proving it had. He had allowed the certification to lapse while caring for his father. Working nights at the university gave him predictable hours, health insurance, and enough flexibility to handle medical appointments. Renewing the credential had always belonged to a future in which someone needed him less. Now the university's employee training program covered the fee. Malcolm attended evening classes, studied during meal breaks, and practiced control sequences on equipment newer than anything inside Annex 4. When the results arrived, he read the word "passed" alone in his kitchen. He did not post it online or bring the letter to Naomi. He called his father, who listened quietly before saying, "Good, now make them pay you for what you know." The university had also created a facilities research liaison position after the audit uncovered 6 other projects using incomplete building records. The job was posted publicly. Candidates were interviewed by an outside engineer, a facilities representative, and a professor from a department unrelated to Naomi's grant. Malcolm applied without asking anyone to recommend him. His presentation began with 2 drawings of the same building. One came from the university's official archive. The other showed every undocumented change discovered during physical inspection. Research begins with a question, he told the panel. Facilities work often begins with a noise, a smell, or a temperature that should not be there. If those two kinds of knowledge never meet, both sides can be correct on paper and wrong inside the building. He received the positions because he was qualified for it, not because the university needed a graceful ending to an embarrassing hearing. The title came with daytime hours, technical authority, and a salary that recognized the difference between cleaning around research and contributing to it. Malcolm kept his old Navy work shirt. He wore it on his first day beneath a new gray field jacket. By then, the independent inspection had confirmed the bypass condition and the danger during generator transfer. The actuator was replaced, the sensors were relocated, and every emergency ventilation plan on campus was scheduled for physical verification. Naomi returned to the project under shared oversight. Her mathematics remained essential, but no model could be approved until a facilities employee verified that the digital drawing matched the actual system. She supported the new authorship policy at every faculty meeting. Operational employees whose observations materially shaped a research conclusion would be named in the project record and consulted before publication. Naomi never called it her reform. She did not mention her role when Malcolm was hired. When colleagues praised her for turning the controversy into progress, she corrected them. The audit created the position, she said. Malcolm earned it. Their first assignments together were careful and almost painfully formal. Naomi brought simulation results. Malcolm brought inspection reports. She stopped using the phrase according to the plan when she meant according to the file. He stopped responding to every question as if it concealed a test. They still disagreed. Naomi wanted sensor data before authorizing changes. Malcolm wanted someone to open the ceiling and look. Sometimes the data proved her right. Sometimes a flashlight proved him right. Neither outcome became a contest. One afternoon, they spent 2 hours investigating a pressure drop that appeared only when the library's archive room reached a certain temperature. The official drawing showed a straight return duct. Above the ceiling, Malcolm found an abandoned junction partially blocked by insulation. Naomi looked from the opening to her tablet. Another missing line. Buildings collect them, Malcolm said. So do institutions. He gave her a measured glance. That sounds like something written for a committee report. I'll remove it. Best revision you've made all day. She laughed, then stopped herself. The silence that followed was not hostile, but it carried the memory of another laugh in another room. That evening, after the technicians had left, Naomi found Malcolm updating the verified plan. She remained on the opposite side of the table. I need to say something without asking you to make it easier for me. Malcolm put down his pencil. Go ahead. At the hearing, I admitted what I did. Since then, I've worried that every decent decision I make will look like an attempt to purchase your forgiveness. Is it? No? At least I hope not. That part isn't mine to measure. Naomi nodded. You never owed me forgiveness, and you never owed me marriage. A surprised smile crossed her face, but Malcolm remained serious. What you said that night was wrong, he continued. What happened afterward was worse. I can work with you because your behavior changed. That doesn't mean the past changed with it. I understand. No, he said gently. I think you're beginning to. They finished the plan and submitted it with both names attached. 2 months later, the project entered its final verification stage. Malcolm's position no longer reported through Naomi's department, and Naomi had no authority over his evaluations, schedule, or salary. On a cold Friday evening, they left a coordination meeting together. At the stairwell, Naomi stopped. Would you have dinner with me? Malcolm examined her expression as carefully once examined the failing model. Is this part of an apology? No. Do I have to solve anything first? No. And if I say no, then I'll wish you a good week and see you Monday. For once, Naomi offered no argument, explanation, or promise. Malcolm allowed the silence to remain until it became clear that she would accept either answer. 7 o'clock, he said. There's a place near the training center. Naomi smiled. I know it. Then don't bring your laptop. They walked out through separate doors, each carrying work that belonged to them by name. There was no prize waiting at dinner and no old debt to collect. Whatever came next would have to begin from zero. 18 months after their first dinner, Malcolm stood inside a converted campus workshop, explaining why a maintenance complaint could be more valuable than a perfect spreadsheet. Around him sat custodians, electricians, mechanics, graduate researchers, and faculty members. On the wall were 2 versions of the emergency ventilation plan from Annex 4. The first omitted the bypass. The second showed the corrected route, verified sensor positions, and a contributor record naming Malcolm Reed. The workshop had been created so employees who understood the university's buildings through daily contact could translate their observations into usable research data. No facilities report was treated as proof by itself, but no report could be dismissed because of the employee's title. Researchers still built models. Mechanics still inspected equipment. The difference was that each side now entered the process before decisions became expensive or dangerous. Malcolm did not present himself as the person who had repaired the university. He knew institutions could adopt new language faster than new habits. He taught employees to document what they observed, preserve timestamps, distinguish evidence from interpretation, and insist that technical contributions remain attached to the people who made them. Naomi attended the workshops when invited. She never stood beside Malcolm as proof that the conflict had ended well. Sometimes she listened from the back. Sometimes she taught researchers how field observations could alter mathematical assumptions. When Malcolm disagreed with her, he did so openly. When she believed he had reached a conclusion too quickly, she said so. Their relationship grew in the same way their best work did, through questions that neither person was required to answer correctly on the first attempt. Outside the university, they learned less impressive things about each other. Naomi discovered that Malcolm's considered every restaurant reservation negotiable if he smelled good barbecue on the way. Malcolm learned that Naomi organized her kitchen cabinets according to a system she insisted was obvious, but could never explain. They argued about work, money, sleep, and whether Malcolm's father should continue living alone. When his father died the following spring, Naomi did not tell Malcolm how to grieve. She answered his phone when he could not, brought food he barely touched, and sat beside him while he sorted 18 years of medical receipts from a kitchen drawer. Malcolm did not thank her for rescuing him. She had not tried to. Months later, when Naomi's grant renewal was rejected, Malcolm did not promise that the university would regret it. He helped her separate disappointment from humiliation and reminded her that losing one project did not erase the work she had done correctly. Their life contained no clean division between the person who taught and the person who learned. Each of them occupied both positions. On the 18th month after the hearing, Malcolm returned from the workshop to find Naomi at his kitchen table. Between them lay no equation, employment form, or committee report. She had prepared dinner, though the unevenly cut vegetables suggested she had spent more time thinking than cooking. Malcolm removed his jacket. "You look like you're about to deliver unfavorable results. I have a question. Should I sit down?" "I think you should." He took the chair across from her. Naomi did not laugh. She did not hide behind cleverness or remind him of the sentence that had begun their conflict. "We have worked very hard, sure, to neither of us owes the other anything," she said. Malcolm waited. "I don't want gratitude from you. I don't want an old mistake rewritten as fate, and I don't want you to say yes, because you think it proves that everything between us has been repaired. She reached across the table but stopped before touching his hand. I love the life we are building. Will you marry me? Malcolm looked at her for a long moment. The first question had been asked in laboratory, disguised as a joke, and protected by the assumption that he could never earn the condition attached to it. The second question offered him no challenge to complete and no debt to collect. He placed his hand over hers. Yes, he said, but not because I solved your equation. I know. And not because you corrected the record. I know that too. I'm saying yes to who you chose to become after correcting it. Cost you something. Naomi's eyes lowered briefly. And I'm saying yes. Malcolm continued, because you kept choosing her when no committee was watching. Their wedding was a quiet civil ceremony attended by Malcolm's sister, two of Naomi's closest friends, and several colleagues who had learned not to confuse importance with spectacle. On the morning of the ceremony, Naomi found Malcolm at the kitchen counter studying a verification diagram from an older campus building. A faint pencil line curved around a fan assembly that did not appear in the official plan. Once, she would have offered an explanation before understanding what he saw. Instead, she moved beside him. Teach me how you found that. Malcolm shifted the paper between them and began with the first inspection note. Respect was not amazement when an underestimated person finally proved useful. It was allowing that person's knowledge to change your decisions before you knew what accepting it might cost. If this story left you thinking about the difference between credentials and knowledge, share the moment when someone's work changed the way you saw them.